thank you very much for coming. This is the number 3 this season. I'm delighted to introduce to you Janne, who is an award-winning European writer, Danish writer, who is known for various novels which have stirred up here and there quite serious controversies, and at the same time became also very successful. She has not only a literature background, but she worked also for the UN in the beginning of her professional career, and therefore traveled in various parts of the world and lived in various parts of the world, also in Africa, which in one or the other way probably shaped also her experience as a writer. And today she is, among other things, also an activist as writer. She's, for example, engaged in the activities around writers against mass surveillance, which was very relevant to the debates around surveillance in the public domain in our countries in 2013. Her most important novels of the last years will be probably in one or the other way also subject of our conversation, of the presentation of Janne tonight. She has lived in various parts of the world, has also to some extent absorbed the experience of living in foreign cultural environments, and therefore this is also subject of her writing, of her thinking, and will be subject also of her presentation tonight. Janne's work is translated to many languages, also to German. She was very much recognized in the German-speaking countries, has a huge audience when she's reading in Switzerland, in Germany, and elsewhere. She was also invited already to the Hochschule der Künste here in Zurich some time ago, not that long ago, when I think 2 of your works have been used for theater productions. Tonight we talk about the experience of living in alien or foreign cultural environments. And therefore the title of your talk tonight is The Human Compass, because once you live in an environment which is we are not used to, then of course you have to navigate, you have to redefine your own identity, and you have to adjust your experiences of culture and social relationships. This is probably what we are going to talk about a little bit further on. Again, welcome very much, Janne, for being here tonight, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mikael, for the nice introduction, and welcome to everybody. Happy to be back in Switzerland and to talk about something that I haven't talked about in this way before. It's a concept I'm slowly developing more and more. Having lived here in more and more cultures and thinking about what it does, and then when this subject came up, about mega cities and how we navigate in this new form of living together, it started my thinking off on some of the experiences I've had in different countries. And that's all somehow also linked to the novel Come, which I'll come back to in the lecture. And I say, towards the end, I'll also be very happy if everyone will join in the debate. This is something I think is relevant for all human beings. So I moved to Tanzania when I was 24 years old, just after finishing my studies as an economist. And my shock of horrors as to what Conrad Heart of Darkness has to do, it didn't have anything to do with actually what I saw of real Africa or her people or her nature. No, but it had all to do with what I saw happen in white people, generally Europeans, who went there. Because a large number of the experts, engineers, economists, or others from Europe, came, and within a very short time, either they would go back, unable to adapt to the local culture in any way, or they would do what was considered go local, which actually is a very derogatory way of saying the people lost their own sense of moral controls. They would start behaving as small emperors, treating both the Tanzanians and others who were not at their social level as second rates, throwing around their powers, their money. People who would be middle class or even lower middle class and very normal in their own countries would suddenly have this king-like manners, generally drinking a lot and being surrounded by young African women, of the kind of beauty and stature they wouldn't probably have found as girlfriends in their own countries. And I'm sorry, I speak mostly about men. Women also displayed bad behaviors in different ways, but not so much in this way. Or even having a number of prostitutes moving in with them. So behavior they would never have allowed themselves in their own social contexts. And I always wondered, what was happening in such a short time that people seemed to change. And often there were people who had families at home, children at home, so you thought, how would they go back and behave in their normal ways there? And then slowly I realized that it must have something to do with that, this ethical codex that make most people behave normally, just disintegrated when there was no social controls. And it's somehow evident if people have more or less always lived in the same social context, within the same culture, the same nation, then it's very simple for them to behave in the so-called right manner, whatever is defined within their own group as right. That, there are certain conventions, there are certain habits. This is how we celebrate birthdays. This is how you treat the other. Are we equal men or women or not? Do we marry? Do we have sex before marriage or not? All those things are like given. And people hold themselves in check because they want to fit in. I think it's a basic biological need of human beings to fit into the group they're surrounded by or define themselves as part of. And even if people want to step out of the conventional culture, they will, in a monoculture, they'll fight those monocultural codexes that they know. It's very seldomly do people question the entire base on which you can say the social codex is established. And most don't therefore even ever know that they don't have their own human compass, that they just follow the compass set by their surroundings. And I mean, it took me a long while observing what I did with these people who fell apart in cultures where there were no direct social restrictions on them. But the key lies exactly in that word dare, that somewhere most people only control their behaviors, to avoid the social chastising, the exclusion or the punishment, but all from external sides. But what is then a human compass? I really am convinced that we all have this somehow inner compass showing north, south, east, and west as to action towards other people, towards nature, towards animals. How we behave towards the world in which we live. But the question is, what is our North Pole? Is that defined again of how we think ourselves, or is it defined by the society that's around us? And generally authority figures, they can either be political or religious or leaders, parents or older siblings or teachers, they tend to be very strong magnetic forces, setting out that North Pole, the direction, as do social conventions and traditions and habits and so on. But the thing is, it's not a problem that we don't have our own compass if society acts normally and in a generally healthy manner. The problem comes when societies go awry. If we have demagogic leaders, if we have growing fascism, if we have growing fanaticism, and can be religious or political and nationalism and so on, then if people don't have their own human compass, they won't question the direction the group is taking. Because as long as the group is going there, people's compass aligns with the general compass of the group, so they feel they're going in the right direction. If everyone says black people are secondary, well, you say it yourself also, so this is the truth. That's why, Nazism, fascism, communism, large-scale genocide, and ethnic cleansing in the last century can be possible. Because if you think about it, if each human being would be asked if they want to participate in ethnic cleansing, in mass-scale wars, and so on, everyone would say no if they really felt themselves as individual human beings. It's only because they don't. It's part of the group that has defined this as correct behavior, that it's not questioned. And I think today, it's so easy for us to sit here and be on the high ethical horse and look back at all the faults of the last century. But today we have an unbridled capitalist system run amok in a way that it functions almost like a totalitarian society, a totalitarian regime. If you think about how it totally ruins the natural habitat of our planet, it enriches very few people. All empirical evidence shows how over the last 20 years, the largest part of the world's population are getting poorer and few get richer. And yet, if anyone questions this whole system, you're considered crazy that today, after the fall of the wall, there's no alternative. And we have in today's world more slaves than ever in history, even at the time we call the time of slavery, both of course sex slaves, but also people working as slaves in industries, in agriculture, in the households. And just the way people get sick trying to keep up with this system. In our rich part of the world, how many are depressed, alcoholics, have eating disorders, or the chemical allergies we have growing up. Evidently, there's something absolutely wrong with the system that we all run after. But somehow, because we all participate in it again, we all align our compasses and we buy the new iPhone because, well, otherwise we can't communicate with everyone else. And I wonder in 50 years from now, if somebody looks back, this won't look like a kind of fascism that we all participated in and didn't follow our own compass. Then within that compass, I have another measurement that I consider a bit more refined, the inner ethical barometer. The compass I just see as something that shows us all general directions. The ethical barometer, of course, is directly linked to ethical actions. And a barometer measures pressure in the air. And I see our actions and words as something that induces pressure on our surroundings. And for example, if we humiliate somebody else, that humiliation comes out, we put out an overpressure, but it creates a vacuum in the other person that they have to do something with and act on. And generally, to fill a vacuum, you humiliate somebody else again. So you might humiliate somebody with words, but if their only ability is to humiliate on with violence, you have put a snowball effect of violence out into the world. And it's again, if we have a system where people have not developed their own ethical barometer, there's no way to stop that snowball effect. Everybody, because again we are biological beings, and I think we need to get out what comes in. So if you get a lot of aggression from your outside world, yes, you can turn it inwards and become depressed or commit suicide, but if you want to keep surviving, generally you have to put out that aggression somewhere else. Only if you have developed your own ethical barometer to be like a ventricle in a way that filters that bad energy, because you understand that you define yourself not by what others do to you. As a human being, your character is not defined by that, but is defined by what you do to others. But it demands a lot of surplus energy to be able to then take that aggression and say, listen, this actually is only an expression of who these other people are. And say, I am only my own actions. I'll come back to when I'll speak about my novel Come later that relates to this. But this is, I mean, a key. And if all of us understood this in the world, there could be basically no wars. Because we all like to think of ourselves as good people, you know, if we sit alone and are at home. But when you go out in the world, generally people defend any aggressive action they commit because they have been victims of somebody else's action. Even most wars are fought on that basis. I mean, we have to kill these other ones, because they killed us in last century, or they will kill us in next century. But if you always just held yourself responsible for your own actions, the world will look a whole lot differently. But somehow that's not what we are taught. In school we are taught, math and reading and a lot of other things, but not these, I think, very basic, important tools to navigate amongst each other. And why it's so important in the context of the metropolis is, I really believe that in this modern world, when many millions of people live together in small spaces, the anonymization that happens is exactly what happened to those Europeans I saw coming to Africa. You are outside social control, or at least you can be if you want to be. It's not like living in a smaller town where you will run into your cousins or parents or your own school friend, and it keeps going on. You will have your kids in school with your neighbors and so on. In big cities, we can be anonymous, which is fantastic. I am not a big fan of standard social controls. I think people should be free, grown-ups, to take decisions, make their own choices. But unfortunately, again, because not so many people have developed that inner ethical barometer, a lot of people make bad choices when they are acting anonymously. We see it on the internet, in the debates. What people write is mind-boggling, if you say. I mean, one thing is, again, that, okay, there are always a few fanatics on the edges, but it's also normal people writing out their aggression, their things that they wouldn't say if they put their name to it or they stood in front of someone else. The anonymization allows people to fall into their worst selves, their darkest selves, their most aggressive self. And I think it is simply an effect of people having suddenly a freedom that they have not been taught how to navigate. And I'm all for the freedom, but it must come with that responsibility and the ability to navigate it, because otherwise we have very aggressive societies. I live in New York, which is a much friendlier town or city than it has a reputation of. But in the US, for example, one thing that is a big problem today is bullying on the internet. A lot of young people and teenagers commit suicide after being bullied in different ways. It can be a girl who sent her boyfriend a picture of her naked when they were together, and they split up. The boy now sends that picture around to everybody. It's on the internet. And it can be just somebody who is considered an outsider, and they tell bad stories about them on the internet. The thing is, when my generation was young and we were bullied, you could move school, or you could move town when it was particularly bad. But today's kids can't move anywhere. These things on the internet follows, it's global, and that's, I think, why they go to this extreme to just commit suicide, being 13, 14, 15 years old. It's absolutely horrendous, but I think again has to do with young people who have not by their parents or teachers or society been taught to have that barometer to control their actions when they have total freedom, that they go overboard, probably not knowing while they do it the consequences it may have. It's not, of course, easy to do the right thing always. We are under social pressures often to act in a group, also financially. I think we all know when we buy a cheap T-shirt that it may have been made in China by prison workers, or at least, by people who were not paid very much in Bangladesh, one of those factories where women burn in when there's a fire or whatever. But we buy a cheap T-shirt because we don't have enough money maybe to buy an expensive one, and even the expensive one might have been produced under those conditions, but the middleman or the brand just makes them more money. So we can't control, I think, everything in this competition-driven world, and we don't have always full information, but at least I think we all have some power in some places to influence the world a little bit. And and it's again, we are, where we don't have a power, we can't control what others do to us, but we all have power somewhere. Even if it's when we step into the bus, how we speak to the bus driver, how we treat our neighbor, how particularly we treat our children. And it's how we act where we have power that defines who we are. So how do we develop this compass and the parameters? This is where I think art plays an enormous role, because it's really when we act in the real world and we realize that our actions have consequences for other people, but those other people could be us. That's when we become wise. That's when we learn empathy. And that's where we develop that codex of the right thing to do. You don't like to be hit, it hurts, so you don't want to hit someone else because you can understand it will hurt then the other person. So it's very simple in that sense. Only this has to be developed on so many different levels in relationships. And since each one of us can only live one life, art is a way to learn dimensions that we can't live. And I'll speak, of course, here particularly of literature, because I think stories are an amazing way to experience lives that we can't live ourselves. It doesn't have to be written literature. I believe in literate worlds, storytelling is doing exactly the same. Even religious storytelling, I think, in many ways can be used in the same way. We'll speak about literature, because literature is as multidimensional as life, which is why I love storytelling. And you can say with a story so many things you cannot say directly. Or if you write an article where words should mean what they mean, and you have to say it directly. But with a story, you create a mirror that's not just showing your back what is in reality. You can show, it's a magic mirror that shows with depth, as much as it is in life, because you can put a lot between the lines in a story. And contrary to film and television, literature doesn't hand us the images or the way to think about something, but we have to enter it. We can't sympathize with someone else. We have to be that story. Not necessarily identify with one character or another, but with the universe of the whole story. And otherwise, we don't get it somehow. If it's really good literature, it's like we must feel it, we must be in it, take on that universe to understand it. And it's that, let me get back to, is if you just think of literature, from a visual standpoint, the words could be anything. It could be a manual for how to drive the car or a legal text. It's only when we put our imagination into it that it comes alive. And it's that activation of our imagination that means literature is like an experience. It actually, if it's good enough, changes us when we read, because it's like we experience it. We do become wiser by experiencing things we couldn't have experienced any other way. And through all these different experiences, and And that wisdom that come out of it, we develop our empathy. We develop our understanding of human mechanisms, because that's what all literature is about. And whether it's a book about so-called, good people acting well, or if it's about criminals or so, everything will open new worlds to us. And I think open that empathy somehow. Because what it really means is that you have to let go of your ego and your persona. And when we do that, we grow, like what we do in our own life. I'll just, as a side remark, say here, there's always this discussion that books are too expensive, but if one really thinks what we get from books, that we get life experiences, I think they're much too cheap. I mean, a book costs less than a decent dinner. So for me, a book is really too cheap. I think it should cost 100 times more. But I'm happy they don't, because otherwise we wouldn't afford them. But anyway, that's a side remark. So literature is a communication of souls also. And when it's at its best, it's communication from one honest soul to another. It's because the writer somehow communicates how he or she sees the world, maybe even unknown to the actual brain, it's coming out from somewhere else. But it is a letter from the soul of the writer to the soul of the reader, and can be this kind of sincere communication that's very rare in modern society, where we live in a society where you speak on the surface, it's what there's room for, and there's very little room for actual intimacy. And when you read a book, there is room for the intimacy, there's room for the vulnerability. You can be alone at home with your book and enter all these emotional worlds. And if the writer has given sincerely of himself, you will also feel it. There's this open, vulnerable world available to you. And of course, literature can also be used as a vehicle for a lot of agendas, but we know, for example, from the Balkan genocides, how literature was used to push nationalistic or ethnic agendas, or make enemy pictures of the other ethnic groups. But at its best, it does exactly the opposite. When it speaks to our core, it also speaks to that core of universal humanity, what we all have in common. In different cultures, we might cry for different reasons or feel humiliated for different reasons, but the feeling is the same. The feeling of sadness, the feeling of humiliation, the feeling of happiness or love is the same, even if it takes different expressions. What is particularly important, I think, with true literature is that somewhere, often the writer doesn't know himself what the message is, because you can't have a clear message. You're searching for something. You're talking about people, how they act in different situations. And something comes out, like a seed that can grow. And so as a writer, you put out there what you've written, but again, it comes alive as a seed in the reader. And therefore becomes an integral part of the reader's comprehension and connection to our universal humanity. It's not, again, you don't give on a tray, this is how to think about the world, because then it'll never work. Okay, you can read interesting or funny or entertaining thrillers like that, but then you put them aside and forget. You don't change your world as those things that grow of a little piece of humanity that you instinctively know in your stomach is true. And if you think in philosophy, what we accept as true is when people say, okay, this is what the many do, this is how people act. Or in economics, we use statistics to say it in sociology. In literature, it's just the opposite. You accept a story as true only if you instinctively feel this person who has these characteristics would act like that in this situation that the writer has made. But you also know if it's not true. And again, entertainment literature generally is so plot-driven, so it doesn't, it's okay, it's not true because it's for entertainment, but you don't go as deeply. Your soul simply steps out the moment you feel such a person would never have acted like that. But we can read Chinese literature, or African literature, or literature from cultures we have no clue of, and still feel this is true if, again, the writer has tapped into, I call it everything, the lake of universal humanity. Because I think it's somewhere where if we take out our own present identity in the world, our nationality, our jobs, our financial level and so on, and we are all soul and enter it, we understand this other thing. We go with an African kid in his village and his problems with his parents or the cows, even if we have no knowledge of it otherwise. And then that's where we grow and we feed off it. But only if it has that truth, if the writer follows some kind of truth. And this brings me to my own writing, that I always write about things I don't understand myself. I always explore a big theme, and can be lots of different things. In Nichts, that's maybe my most known book, is simply the meaning of life. And in this little one, Krieg, it's about what it means to be a refugee, to lose control of your own life. In Europa, alles was dir fehlt, I was exploring what happens to you if you want to kill your own emotions. It's about a man who can't get the woman he's desperately in love with. She's married. So it's about this passion, I think we all know, when you have a connection, but maybe there's not room in the normal structural world for it. So he sets out to kill those emotions. And I wanted to see what history means in a relationship and also between groups of people. Because I have a theory that what happens between groups of people and also geopolitically between nations or ethnic groups just is an added up sum of what happens between two people. So what happens when history goes wrong? How can we write it? Can we forget? Can we forgive? Or how do we even do that? So these were some of the questions I raised in this book that takes place in the Balkans genocide in Bosnia. And often it takes me years before I understand what my books have taught me myself. And in readings, even if one hears many of the same questions, ever so often someone will say something and I thought, well, yeah, it's probably true, but I never thought about this before. And I also think if I knew what a book would have taught me immediately, I don't think I would have succeeded. I think books have to be bigger than the writer as a person to be successful. Because as a person, you can only be who you are right here and now, what you can have in your frontal lobes. But in a book that has maybe taken 4 years to write, and I feel I write with my stomach because that's where I have access to that lake of everything, or of universal humanity. If I listen properly, something come out that I don't know I know. So it just tells me slowly what it was I was tapping into. If ever in any of my books my own philosophy or thinking was obvious, I would think I would have failed because I'm really on an open search when I write. But I also write essays, and as Schindhelm said, that I'm also an activist in various fields and participate in the public debate. And there, of course, I have to say more directly what I think. And in today's world, unfortunately, often one has 2 minutes to say something. So it's a shortening of all nuances. But I have felt more and more that it's a necessity. I came from a world where I was very directly involved in international politics and peacemaking and conflict resolution. But I always wrote fiction and always knew I wanted to go that way. I just had to find my way and pay off student debts and all those things. But then I only wrote literature for a number of years, and in a way also missed the other part of the world. And I'm very happy actually that it's coming together somehow, that because of my literature, I also have access to a public debate where I can use my experiences that few writers have from your United Nations and other worlds. So I'm trying to bridge more and more the political with the literary world. But again, absolutely recognize that my literature is separate, even if they raise some of the questions that are relevant to politics of today. So that's how I see it. And I wanted to talk specifically a little bit about, at the end here, this novel, Come. When I wrote this, I wanted exactly to figure out if human beings did have this inner ethical barometer to steer their actions, particularly in a field where conventions either don't give a clear guideline, or if maybe what the inner ethical barometer says is against the standard convention. And then I thought, okay, where don't we have any real conventions for ethical behavior? And funnily, it's in my own field, the field of arts, where any transgression is normally considered good. You're courageous if you cross the line, writing literature or in art. And very strangely, a basic question like, why is it bad to tell the secret of a friend to others or publicly? It's considered morally bad. Whereas if I do it in literature, I'm lauded as courageous. I've not found a logical answer, but it was part of a starting point in this book that then became about a lot of other things. And I'll just read a little bit from this and then tell the story a bit as I go on, but just so you get a feeling what the atmosphere of the book is. Der Schnee fällt in dichten Flocken. Ihr Rücken ist schon verschwunden. Steht in der Tür und betrachtet die Fußspuren 3 Stufen hinunter, quer nach links, über die Straße und weg. Die Schneeflocken stieben durch die Türöffnung, wirbeln auf sein Hemd und das Fensterbrett dahinter. Rührt sich nicht. In der Luft ein schwacher Geruch nach feuchter Erde, obwohl es doch unmöglich ist. Die schmale, gepflasterte Straße in der alten Stadtmitte ist von einer undurchdringlichen Asphaltdecke umschlossen. Es hat den ganzen Tag geschneit und auf der Straße liegt der Schnee ein gutes Stück höher als der Bordstein, den man in der einen Ausfahrt, die gefegt ist, gerade noch erahnt. Der Teppich vor seinen Schuhen ist nass und rechts an der Hauswand klettert ein kleiner Schneewall heimlich immer höher. Trotzdem zögert er noch etwas. Sie hatte Stiefel mit dicken Gummisohlen an. Er kann die rompenförmigen Rillen in den Fußabdrücken sehen, die ihm am nächsten sind. Leise rieselt der Schnee auf die Abdrücke, seine Brille beschlägt und seine Hand auf der Klinke wird weiß vor Kälte. Er schiebt die Tür zu. Aber ehe sie zufällt, zieht er sie wieder auf. Auf der Straße ist ihre Spur undeutlicher, als ob sie den Fuß nachzöge oder einfach nicht imstande wäre, die Stiefel aus dem Schnee zu ziehen, und von einem Abdruck zum nächsten verläuft eine flache Rinne. Die anderen sind längst gegangen. Langsam schließt er die Tür, dreht den Schlüssel um und geht in sein Büro zurück, setzt sich an den Schreibtisch und wuchtet ein dickes Manuskript vor sich hin. Das Manuskript ist feucht. Die ersten Seiten kleben zusammen und oben rechts ist es so nass, dass man durch die Vorderseite den verwischten Text lesen kann. Die Ecken biegen sich nach oben und unter dem Titel ist ein Rotweinfleck, aber er weiß nicht, ob er nicht immer schon da gewesen ist. Er nimmt die Brille ab, vergräbt das Gesicht in den Händen, schließt die Augen. Sie hätte es nicht zurückbringen müssen. Heutzutage kann man einfach ein neues ausdrücken. Er bleibt eine Weile still sitzen, richtet sich plötzlich auf und schlägt mit der Handfläche auf das Manuskript. Was bildet die sich eigentlich an? Du hast die Wahl, hatte sie gesagt, ehe sie aufstand und ging. Selbstverständlich hat die Wahl. Wer sonst? Then I'll tell a little bit and read from somewhere later because we don't have too much time. So we have this publisher. He's in his middle age, 50s, and is very powerful. He's married to a woman who's also a very powerful politician, a minister. It's never really said, but it's kind of evident it takes place in Denmark, even if I just call it the country, because it could be anywhere. His father-in-law, as he slowly comes out, is the main shareholder of this big publishing house. And he basically himself considers that he has everything under control. But the problem is he sits in his office this evening and has to decide whether to send into print the next day a manuscript of a best-selling author. And then a woman has come by, Petra Winter, who's also a writer, and said, well, this is my story. And he's himself given her the manuscript to read, because it's about a country, I made it fictive, Morensau, where she has worked at some point. And she says this thing, du hast die Wahl, and leaves it in his hand, in a way. And he snows into his office this evening, where he's supposed otherwise to be at a political dinner with his wife, but he doesn't really want to go anyhow. And he has at the same time to write a speech about ethics in art. And slowly as it comes out, he can write anything in this speech. And I think we all know if you want to, you can theoretically put arguments in almost any direction. And here in this field, of course, it's easy enough. You think about Thomas Mann or Proust, Arcis Lai, Picasso, you say they all used their personal lives, splatter them on the pages, and that's how it is. And who are you to question all these great authors? But yet, when it's a person who stands in front of you, it suddenly looks different. And he this man who's normally very busy, suddenly has the time to think about his own life a bit. And living in this marriage where it becomes evident is much of just a social construct, having lots of affairs. And he also has that strange attraction for Petra Winter. So all night he kind of discusses with her, but in his own head, because she's not there, of course. But she becomes like the voice of conscience. And as all voices of conscience, she's bloody irritating. But it comes back as he sits and reflects. And if I can still have a little moment and read a few more pieces, then I think just to show the discussion he has with her. I should say Lula, when the name came up, is a woman who was important to him that he had an affair with some years back, and who was more of a, you can say, natural person, not intellectual, or what I should say. And he has presently, as a story, an affair with a woman called Vera. So these women name comes up in between. And this is part of the speech as he starts. Alle Geschichten gehören anderen, schreibt er. Nicht einmal die Geschichte unseres eigenen Lebens kann erzählt werden, ohne dass gleichzeitig die Geschichte vom Leben anderer Menschen erzählt wird. Er betrachtet das Bild seiner jüngsten Tochter. Was wird sie eines Tages über ihn schreiben, wenn sie das Schreiben wählen sollte? Afrika ist weit weg, hat er gesagt. Ich bin hier. Wir sind in derselben Welt, hörte er sie fortfahren. Aber so hat er es nicht in Erinnerung. Nein, sie erwiderte bloß ihr, ich bin hier. Er sagte das alles. Lula würde sagen, so ist es. Wir haben die Verantwortung für den, der vor uns steht, schreibt er. Korrigiere es dann zu. In welchem Maße wir die Verantwortung haben für denjenigen, der vor uns steht, hängt davon ab, ob wir stärker oder schwächer sind. Wer die Macht hat, das Leben des anderen zu beeinflussen, hat auch die Verantwortung. Ja, so ist es. Er löscht den ganzen Absatz. Er sollte es von allen am besten wissen. Er kommt vom Rand, dem Bereich zwischen außerhalb und innerhalb. Er hat die Macht. Oder ist er ein Opfer der Macht? Du bist einer von uns, würde seine Frau sagen. Sie muss es so sagen, würde Lula einwerfen und hinzufügen, weil sie weiß, dass du in Wirklichkeit einer von uns bist. Ihm selbst ist es egal. Es gilt praktisch zu sein. Es ist praktisch, innerhalb verheiratet zu sein. Selbstverständlich hat er die Macht. Die Literatur, die sich verkauft, finanziert die, die sich nicht verkauft. So ist es immer gewesen. Das muss auch Petra Winter verstehen. Die Bestseller des Autors finanzieren ihre mathematischen Lyriksammlungen. Er schreibt die letzten 4 Zeilen noch einmal, will sie dann ein weiteres Mal löschen, setzt sie aber schließlich in eckige Klammern, fährt fort. In der Ausübung der Kunst entledigt sich der Künstler der Verantwortung, die wir Menschen im wirklichen Leben haben, eben weil die Kunst nicht die Wirklichkeit ist. Weil nämlich in der Kunst die Grenzen der Verantwortung, die wir in der Wirklichkeit haben, gefunden werden müssen und das lässt sich nur bewerkstelligen, indem man zuallererst die in der Wirklichkeit existierenden Grenzen aufgibt. Wir arbeiten ja auch nicht mit Versuchstieren, Giftstoffen, Atomwaffen und solchen Sachen. Wie kannst du von denen, die das tun, erwarten, dass sie an ihrem Platz Verantwortung übernehmen, während du das an deinem Platz nicht tust? Es ist Fiktion. Es ist praktisch, Petra Winter zu widersprechen. Das sollte es umso leichter machen. Wird die Welt mit diesem Buch besser sein? Es ist Fiktion. Wird die Welt ohne dieses Buch schlechter sein? Daran kann man Kunst nicht messen. Das weißt du doch selber. Ist es Kunst? Es ist Fiktion. Etwas davon ist Wirklichkeit, meine Wirklichkeit. Aber die Namen sind fiktiv. Keiner wird es wissen. Ich weiß es. Sagte sie ich oder sagte sie, du weißt es? Ich habe geschwiegen aus Rücksicht auf etwas, das wichtiger war als ich. An dieser Geschichte soll sich kein anderer bereichern, sagte sie das oder sagte sie, es wird Schaden anrichten, wenn diese Geschichte erscheint. Schaden für Morensau, Schaden für mich. Es ist praktisch zu sein. So ist die Welt, so ist die Wirklichkeit. Ist sie so? Oder sagte sie, willst du sie so haben? Er ist sich nicht ganz sicher, wie viel von diesem Dialog in Wirklichkeit abgelaufen ist und wie viel davon hier und jetzt in seinem Kopf entsteht. Es ist unpraktisch, mit Petra Winter zu sprechen. Er sieht, wie ihr Mund die Worte formt. Ich habe geschwiegen aus Rücksicht auf. Aber hat sie es wirklich gesagt? Sie sagte auch nicht, dass sie sterben müsse. Oder es ist die Frau im Buch, die am AIDS stirbt. Und was, wenn nichts davon wahr ist? Er kann doch hier nicht Richter in einem Prozess sein, der gar nicht stattfindet. Sie sind gesund und munter aus, ihr fehlt bloß ein Stück vom Ohrläppchen. Wenn sie meint, sie habe hier eine Streitsache, muss sie den Rechtsweg einschlagen. Ja, so muss es sein. Ich kann keinen Prozess gegen jemanden anstrengen, weil kein Gesetz es verbietet, die Geschickten anderer zu verwenden, sagt sie. Siehst du, antwortet er. Was sehe ich? Er kann Petra Winter nicht ausstehen. And I should maybe also say that this story that she wants to keep secret is a very gruesome assault, and it's not quite clear whether she has been mass raped or just attacked by a number of men and beaten, but probably she has been mass raped. And anyway, it could have consequences if this story comes out. And I'll just read a very short part because it's there are 3 things that she says all the time that links up to what we talked about before. She said, das eine Leid rechtfertigt nicht das andere. Und in der Handlung des Einzelnen liegt der Keim zu den Handlungen vieler. Und was andere einem antun, kann man überleben, nicht was man anderen antut. And they come in different ways. And then there's one last thing about choice here. Remember, it has snowed all night, and he looks in the morning out, where all night he's been going to the window to look at her footprints. And now he goes over and can hardly see them and looks again at the snow. Und es ist, Schnee hat etwas Merkwürdiges. Es ist, als gäbe einem die weiße Decke die Illusion, von vorn anfangen zu können, sich anders entscheiden zu können, alles Verkehrte richtig zu machen oder jedenfalls, wenn nicht von vorn, so doch von hier aus anzufangen. Auf der Grundlage der im Laufe der Zeit erlangten Klugheit seine Wahl zu treffen, auf der Grundlage all der Fehltritte, die der Schnee mit seiner weißen Möglichkeit zugedeckt hat. Von hier kannst du anfangen. Du kannst wählen, von hier aus zu starten oder auch es zu lassen. And the debate that he has mainly, of course, with himself, what to do, it's written in a way so I had as a writer to be him. I wasn't looking from the outside, even if it's a third person. And I hope I have written it so that also the reader becomes the publisher and the dilemma he's in becomes the reader, because of course he knows that if he doesn't publish this book, with all the cost it will have for the publishing house and him personally, another publishing house will just publish it. That's the world we live in. So he says he can't save the world, he won't change anything. But at the same time, will it when it's a person who stands in front of him and there might be consequences? So it again comes down to we all in moments of, not like this maybe, but we all have situations where we have the power to take a decision that impacts other people's lives and which may be uncomfortable for us to do what we know is right, but what do we do? And in this competition-driven world, how much freedom do we have to make so-called right choices? So the publisher's dilemma hopefully becomes the reader's dilemma. And what I learned myself, and I still feel this book has not settled in me totally, I'm still learning from it, but one of the main things I learned was all these questions he raises, what can be done in art and in life, it becomes also about ethics in life, of course, cannot be answered without asking another question, which is who has the power here? Again, the one who has the power has a whole different sense of responsibility than the one who doesn't. I mean, as writers, it's very simple. We write against autocratic regimes, power holders, and it can be necessary to go very far, or if it's against people who have abused power in some ways. But we also have the power when we use our pen, and this is often overlooked among artists. We consider, we are the ones who fight power, but we are also power holders over the people who have confided in us, or who have lived with us, or our children. And so how we use that power is also who we are. I think I will stop here and we can continue talking. And yeah, this was a bit of the human compass. Yeah. Keep this? Okay, maybe. Yeah, thank you. Oh. Yes, as writers, we don't talk always so much. So, thank you.
It was a very strong, almost confession about the power of writing, the power of literature in the end. Thank you very much from another writer to you. It is very interesting to follow you because when we usually have this type of lecture, somebody opens a PowerPoint presentation, shows a lot of pictures on the screen. That was very different today. So you really elaborate mostly verbally on things, which shows already that your world is very much made also out of words, and we may actually come back to this because we are here sitting in an art school where different art disciplines are assembled with different opportunities of expressing emotions, thoughts, etc. And one which is maybe most vulnerable nowadays is the language, I would say. It's already interesting how we are producing this talk here. A part of it was in German. We could easily actually have our conversation in German too, but we are so much used to English in the meantime that we are probably continuing in English. I don't want to maybe occupy yourself with too many of my own questions. I hope that there will be a few questions also from the audience, but maybe I at least have the first choices. Coming back to the title, Human Compass, you were describing that once upon a time, and maybe even until today, the teacher or the school has a certain instrumental role in defining where is the North Pole, and therefore also defining how our compass is, which is implanted into us, should work at least. On the other hand, later you were describing that we are living in a kind of rather critical status of our society where many things are in a kind of decay or at least tremendous transition. So it seems as if also the teachers, the school, actually needs a compass and doesn't know exactly anymore where is the North Pole. So therefore, I wonder what kind of advice, given your also different or diverse professional experiences, what kind of advice would you actually give educational institutions today in our society in order to redefine the North Pole or to sort of re-implant something which is a human compass, which is maybe missing among many of our contemporaries?
Yeah, it's a big question, and there's no easy answer. I think we have to start just talking about it. I think in the smaller classes, it's almost something that I feel lack as a subject. If you look at the schedules of younger school classes, it's all external kind of subjects. There's not one where we learn how to deal with relationship among human beings. And since it seems again in the modern societies, it's not necessarily something people learn at home anymore. Kids go in kindergartens from they're very young, and they may learn certain group behaviors, but it's also a lot law of the jungle. The stronger kid sets the rule. And with the internet, so social norms fall apart. So I think in a way it should be a subject. And like you learn math, you should learn, we could call it the human compass or human relationships, and learn how we should interact in a way where also there's an understood or understanding that we live multiculturally today. And what may seem right when you're in your village is not the same as what will be right when you're in a city when many different cultures interact, where you have to have a different kind of respect for people doing things differently. Your way may not be the correct, but it must coincide with other ways of living and how we go about this. And then I think at higher levels of schools or universities, it's just something that should be discussed much more. And then hopefully, more books will be written on it. I took it up here as a fiction in the novel form. I'm sure philosophers have dealt with it their way or could deal with it more.
You were talking a lot about empathy in your speech, and at the same time, of course, we obviously live rather in a world where the survival of the fittest is the norm. And school probably teaches exactly this very often. So I wonder if you came across at some point, maybe even in other parts of the world, let's say pedagogical methods or procedures or ideas on how to actually overcome this kind of prevalence of egotism in education, or let's say the utilitarian approach to education. And rather put an emphasis on what you call empathy or altruism, the possibility of relating to the other human being or the other social existence. Have you ever come across this kind of experience or practice in education?
I have in life, I don't know, since I haven't dealt so much directly with education, it's a difficult field for me to talk directly about. Exactly, life is educational. I must say in Africa, despite all the difficulties and the poverty I've seen, I also learned how you're much closer to humanity there, that to your own humanity, that somehow there's not that filter that we are brought up to live with in the Western world, for good and bad, but it's almost like we have an abstraction from life, from our own emotions, from what is really important. I mean, let me give an example. In the beginning, when I was at the UN office in Tanzania, I would find it rather irritating that when we should finish a report or have things copied, I mean, there would always be some of the Tanzanian employees off somewhere to an uncle's funeral, and they often in Africa have many uncles, and since transport wasn't good, the roads weren't good, it could take 3 days to travel to their village and 3 days to come back, and the funeral festivities would take their 3 days in themselves. So, and the other thing that I got impatient by was when Tanzanians greet you in Swahili, they would say in many different ways. So, okay, how are you? How is your house? How is your wife? How is your dog? How is, your weather, basically your garden? And it can be a little conversation that can take 5 to 10 minutes before you get to the point, and could you copy this report? And as a Northern European coming and wanting things done, it really did irritate me. But after a while, you start realizing that something else was happening in these small conversations, in this thing that people were prioritizing their funerals rather than the report. That you're closer to what life is really all about. The relationship with the person right in front of you, the relationship to other human beings, rather than anything that's abstract. And the more I lived there, the more I saw how it means that you feel much more alive. Because we are biological beings. And it really showed me the difference between when we live in terms of being, whatever we do, but being in that relating to the world around us, the direct world around us, rather than at an abstract level. And in the West, we seem to have abstracted ourselves so much that we always prioritize something in that abstract world rather than the immediate. I mean, people postpone, at least in Scandinavia, funerals till it fits into the work schedules of all family members and travel. I think in Sweden sometimes you can postpone funerals 3 weeks. I mean, it's easier maybe where it's cold, but that's what people do. I mean, we know in our parts of the world, we have children often in the late 20s or 30s, because you have to have your education and these other things. And again, with the internet, you have put in another level of abstraction. We speak and communicate and relate through these technologies that people sit together at a dinner, but most of the time they check their phones and somehow. And I really am convinced the more we extract ourselves from the direct living, the direct contact with the world around us, the less we feel real life. And also the less we understand the consequences of our actions. I mean, how that can be translated educationally, I don't know, I'm not a pedagogue, but it's for me very important, and yet it feeds into all my writing, that experience.
In this regard, you were also describing that you were deriving also a notion of empathy by the fact that I should actually act in a way that I always can consider that how would that, what kind of impact it would have on me if somebody else would act on me the way how I act to others. So let's assume this is a possibility to sort of maybe prevent or at the same, or let's say guide actions and behavior. It of course implies also that somebody can already anticipate this impact. I think today we have very often the situation that people see things happening without knowing the impact, in particular young people. You know, we are almost overwhelmed by a lot of things we can already sort of perceive, but we don't know actually what does it mean. You know, I mean, our media today present a lot of gruesome content every day onto even minors without any problem. So on the one hand, it seems as if young people have a much deeper notion or a much deeper understanding of the world because they see so many more things, good and bad things. But at the same time, that doesn't seem to be really knowing them. The question is, if you don't know really, but you're already free, as you say, to navigate, free to act, how to bridge actually this lack of knowledge between what kind of impact you potentially can actually cause to somebody you're able to act to. Do you think that art is a possibility, for example, of bridging this gap?
Yeah, I think so. It's again both storytelling or artistic photography can show us something, because it's not the direct reality, but an interpreted reality in some ways. Or I think it opens people more. If I read a story that I know isn't the truth, I'm less defensive than if it's the truth. So I open up more. If I see a painting of a war, it's maybe allowing me more to understand it than if I see the press footage from it, where you almost have to close your eyes. It's so strong, and you think, oh, this can't happen. But so you cannot be open to it in the same way. So I think art has a big role to play. But I also think you're very. I mean, my niece said the other, who's 23, she doesn't want to hear anymore about all these bad things that happen in the world that she can't do anything about. And I think it does make us callous, that we actually hear of too many catastrophes, because that natural response of any empathetic person is, I must do something. But we can't do something at the same time about hunger in Sudan and flooding in Pakistan or bombing in Syria. So what do we end up doing? You end up being paralyzed and just sit back. And this is where I think it's so important to take back empathy to the near society, and not meaning that we shall not help people far away and do the development aid and so on, but I think with the emotional empathy, we must always, take care of those who are nearby, because otherwise we make a callous society. And then we must count on other people taking care where they are. And it also means that we must help the refugees who come to our shores, and so we cannot let people drown before our eyes. It destroys everything that's human about ourselves.
Before I ask the audience to maybe raise some question, one last point from mine, which always interests me because it's somehow also a subject of my work. You were several times mentioning that our traditional values or maybe solidarities like nation or race have to be replaced by something more universal. But first and foremost, we put a no in front of it. No nation anymore, or post, right? Post-nation, national, for example, identity. We don't want to have a class society anymore. We don't think that religious relationships should prevail, race, gender. So that is, if we want to get rid of this, or at least if we want to harmonize it by making it less prevalent, what is the positive setting of this? In
my mind, first of all, I should say that I'm a strong believer that people shall have the religions, whatever, that they feel connected to. I am not condescending of religion in that sense. I think religion gives a lot of people a lot. It's just, it should not be some bigger power that tell people what to do. It should not have a power over other people what to do. But yeah, I think it's more about how we define the individual should change. That, again, in a way, it's not interesting in today's world, your nationality or your religion. So I'm interested in how are you acting towards me and other people, where it will have an impact. And yeah, what is your character? Are you a nice person, a funny person, an honest person? And so if we use that as the basic definition, then everything as your race and all these other things become irrelevant. Even the discussion when we discuss ISIS or other, terrorist groups for the moment, it's not relevant to discuss Islam as a religion when 80% of Muslims, in any case, or even many more, live totally peacefully or so. So these discussions, at least what we have in Denmark, and I think in large part of Western Europe, always, can Islam coexist with democracy? It's totally ridiculous discussions. But again, I don't care why a person acts violently or fanatically. So the question is, does he do that or not? So if we look much more at the actual action of each individual, rather than the ideologies or the external definitions, I think, first of all, we avoid a lot of conflict and a lot of just airy debates that lead nowhere.
Okay, please. That's your floor is yours. Who has a question, a comment?
It's a lot of big
something
subjects, but also
Maybe
very concrete questions are welcome. So
we can go on here, of course, but maybe you have something to intervene here. Hartmut, we need always a mic first, so that there is a mic.
It's probably a little bit complicated what I'm trying to ask, but we are here at this university discussing a lot about the necessity to becoming international and whatever that means, actively international, going abroad, make experiences in our educational programs outside our cultural boundaries. What I want to ask you is, do you think if we, as part of this Western culture, want to play a future part in this world, we have to leave our boundaries really to start not only making touristic experiences somewhere else, but really have to be very forcing to leave our boundaries and make different experiences outside these boundaries.
You mean outside the university setting?
Not only
or the
outside
country?
this cultural boundaries. It's like you were talking about experiences of strangers in Africa who behave like emperors. You can also say there's a positive side also possible.
I guess people try to feel like emperors.
No, like you yourself. I mean, that's another part of the question. How important were all the experiences you were making away from your culture, from your home, to become this person you are now? And I'm not talking only about you as a writer, but also a person who is engaging herself in lots of themes, problems, activities, and things like that.
Yeah, it's a good question, because we never know what has made us who we are. I think I'm also very influenced, for example, by the fact that my mother's Austrian and came as a war child to Denmark, where Red Cross sent the skinniest kids to richer countries, some to Switzerland and some to Denmark or Sweden. And my grandfather on my father's side had been German and left Germany just after the First World War, walked to become a Dane, because there was nothing in Germany. So I've, in a European context, I'm already mixed and an immigrant refugee kid in some way, and grew up with that feeling of being a bit different. And that has influenced me a lot also, I think. But yes, I have learned a tremendous amount from moving around in the world. At the same time, I don't think it would be right if one said, we in the Western world, to expand our horizons, should all go to Africa or in a refugee camp. There's also something like poverty tourism in it, if one goes for that purpose of expanding one's horizon. So it's complex in that thing. I think somehow, again, if we read, and also it's not everyone doesn't have the possibility to leave their lives and go out and live it. And I think unless one does it full-heartedly, I mean, for another purpose than just seeing things, it won't have that effect. You somehow have to involve yourself and say, now my life is here. You live in a home where you have a country where you have to make, I mean, even the electricity connections or telephone, that's what teaches you another culture, to have to do all these basic daily things in a place. And that you don't have if you go out to say, oh, now I want for 3 months to experience this other culture. I think generally just, open minds, open hearts changes a lot. And also inviting people in from these cultures to speak to us. But also we have to remember that, at least for many other countries or cultures, most people won't have the money to come to us and learn. And there's an imbalance in that that we have to be very aware of.
If I may to comment on this too, first of all, just from a personal perspective, as I lived more than 2/3 of my life outside of the country I was born in, but also as a kind of professional experience, the interesting thing is that, of course, mostly if we are traveling, it's luxury. So we're not really forced, we're not coerced into migration like the people who usually come to us. There's already a very different attitude and a different social experience being in an alien environment because you want to go there, because you want to explore something, or you're forced to because you have to leave your own country where you can't live anymore. On the other hand, I truly believe that there is something in common, and this is the experience of an alien environment, which ironically may even reassure you of your own belonging, where you come from. When you're always living in your own environment, you somehow never really question it, because you're living among yourselves, among the people of the same country, of the same nation, of the same solidarity, of the same culture, whatever you call it. Once you go somewhere else, you suddenly notice there's something different here. And you may not only feel that the others are different, but you feel also that you are different than the others. Otherwise, at least the others will tell you that you are different. And suddenly, you have to explain that you are different because you come from somewhere else. So you learn a lot about your own belonging while you're abroad. And if you speak about internationalization of an institution, I think this is exactly the same. It's not so much about only traveling abroad for touristic or other reasons, but reassuring where you're belonging to. I would even say this is a mission for the whole institution as such. We were talking about the compass, about where's the North Pole. In times where institutions crumble and we have to question our role as educational schools, for example, we have, of course, to wonder how to reconnect to this mission. And I think by absorbing this broader context of other cultures, we can also do so. So that's why I think it's not only about traveling, but it starts actually here at the school itself. And it starts with us sort of rethinking about what is actually really our role today in this kind of changing environment. Another question?
Maybe so you can also ask
yes,
in German, because I understand, but I'm actually not fluent. When I read, it's easier, but I understand.
Yeah, well, you could also answer in English, of course.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, thank you. I also have actually a very personal question, I guess, because you lived in a lot of different countries and you have to adapt to the culture of the country. And actually, how did you manage to keep your own human compass, your own things that you grow up, but also adapting to this new culture and getting part of this new culture? How did you manage this kind of conflict? Or
part of it was, I mean, slowly the more countries I lived in, I became aware of the difference between people's culture and people's character. And of course, some of it melts together. And in monoculture, people, they don't even distinguish between the two. Because, okay, if you, in Denmark, for example, if you meet someone and you're a polite person, you give a hand. And so that's what we define as politeness. And anybody who wouldn't give somebody their hand are impolite. But there are other cultures where that same politeness would be shown by putting the hand on the heart. but the politeness is the same. The gesture is just different. And this is what I slowly learned, is that the way we act is a language, just like the words we speak. But it's a language that express your various characteristics. So you just have to learn that language. Sometimes it takes a little while, and it's more complex than what we see initially, you know, at the superficial level. Okay, in France, to have that same politeness, you kiss on 2 sides. I think in Belgium it's just 1, and it's 3 times. Ah, then I was very impolite earlier today. Yeah, or they like to kiss more. but it's in these small things that you have to learn cultural interaction as a language. And then in multicultural settings, what I like with that, where I worked in the United Nations or when I've lived in multicultural settings, is there's always a slight uncertainty as whose culture do we follow here when we interact? Do we give hand? Do we kiss, and how many times? But in that slight uncertainty, there's an enormous humanity. You look each other in the eye and you kind of find a way that functions here. And it's okay that you get it wrong as long as you can read in each other's eyes that the intention is good. And in that sense, I think in our multicultural world and the global cities where we speak about, there's a key of how to interact in that. A key to always being open that, okay, what form do we use here? And as long as we are expressing the same goodwill, different forms can be acceptable.
Please.
Yes.
Also, wenn wir einen Kompass haben, unseren eigenen moralischen Kompass, und ein Kompass hat ja immer ein Ziel. Und meine Frage ist, welches ist das Ziel unseres Kompass? Und werden wir mit diesem Kompass und mit diesem Ziel geboren? Also, wieso streben wir eigentlich ein moralisches Verhalten an? Also, woher kommt das, dieses Bedürfnis?
Yes, that is exactly a very complex question. I think the compass itself, as I said, doesn't have like a purpose, one purpose, because it depends on the time in which we live. Mm-hmm. What is good for, I think, the society, the world, the interactions between people. Somewhere I do believe that the purpose of it all ought to be that we leave the world somehow a better place than the one we were born into, with whatever actions we can do, bringing up our children in a way that's well, or doing something for the environment. Many different ways we can do it, writing a book that people find worth reading, or teaching somebody who gets inspired. Different ways, but somehow towards that. But again, the compass can go wrong if we are having leaders who show the wrong direction and we follow that. So more specifically, that ethical barometer, if we have that and have that developed, that is, really that basics of how can we interact better, how can we become better beings ourselves, and how can we make the world around us better. And it's something that has been left much too much to religions, I think. But it's really essential if our society shall function, that we develop.
Kann ich noch eine kurze Frage? Ja. Also wenn wir ja die Welt besser machen, dann ist es ja auch im Endeffekt jedenfalls für uns gut. Das heißt, wir profitieren von dieser besseren Welt. Also handeln wir eigentlich alle als Egoisten moralisch, weil wir, indem wir moralisch handeln, uns selber gut tun.
Well, but not as short-term egoists. That's a whole difference. I am not belonging to the kind of philosophers who think that all actions are the same because they come back with something good for us. Like, even if people are altruistic, if they feel better being altruistic, they are just as bad as those who are narcissistic or even sociopaths, because they also feel better acting bad to others. Because actions have consequences for other people. So I can't set these things alike. It's the consequences that are important, and it's when we act that who we are, has consequences to other people. So yes, maybe over the long run it's egoistic, to do something to help the environment, but I still think it's bloody much better than those who cut down trees to, get richer.
But I think because this is of course a very interesting question for all of us in one or the other way, and nobody has a final answer to this. The interesting thing is that you actually never know what is really the better or the best. Maybe somebody later would know. But there is maybe something like an inner voice telling you that this is better than another alternative, and you may follow your voice or not, regarding or according to your own intention or to the intentions imposed on you. But I think generally it is indeed something which is also instrumental to humanity, that we don't know finally. There is some sort of uncertainty, the same way like there's an uncertainty in social relationships, right? So we have to negotiate, and we have also always to negotiate sort of with the future of our, or the anticipation of our deeds. So that's why I think there is no whatsoever, let's say, constitution telling us how to be always good, as you also said earlier already. We have to be able to fail and to stand for this also.
So I have this kind of question that I asked my friends once. It's who is the better person? The one who does something bad, like, I don't know, he killed someone just because he's black, but he believes in it, so he believes that it's the right thing? Or is the better person the person who actually knows that it's wrong, but still does it just because of, the human compass, that we adopt the way to see the world from our society. So, and my friends all said that the one who actually knows what's the right thing is the better person. So the one who will do something bad but knows that it's the wrong thing. And I always said that to me the better person is the one who actually believes in what he does, even if it's actually bad. So what would be your answer?
My answer would be, first of all, for the person who gets killed, it doesn't matter. And secondly, I agree with you in the sense that the person who thinks he does the right thing, he can learn that he doesn't do the right thing. The ones who, know that they maybe shouldn't do this, but anyhow do it, they're much more difficult to change. How will you reach them? But again, I think it's more interesting to look at consequence, and the rest becomes theory. If one of your friends were killed, again, doesn't matter so much if it was one or the other who did it.
You had a question? Maybe you can. No? Any other question?
Oh, we have one there.
We need a microphone, please.
Sie haben die Literatur so wie ein Sparringpartner beschrieben, um herauszufinden, was gut oder schlecht ist, also so vielleicht auch wie ein Spiegelbild. Und dann haben Sie gesagt, dann spürt man, was authentisch ist in der Literatur. Und meine Frage ist, gibt es auch etwas Ähnliches wie diese Authentizität im moralischen Betragen oder also eben wie man dann handelt in einer bestimmten Situation? Noch eine Anschlussfrage. Diese Authentizität, die hat ja auch in der Kunst etwas zu tun. Man spürt etwas, dass es eine Kraft hat, dass es eine Originalität hat und dass es eine Verbindlichkeit hat. Also sind das Kriterien oder irgendwelche Orientierungspunkte?
Oh, we are in the big questions today. Yeah? To the
It's your fault because you were talking about the truth.
yeah, opening these things. As to the moral truth, what I believe, without being a theoretical philosopher, is that moral truths change over time. There are a few things that are pretty basic, that we shouldn't kill each other. But yet, I can imagine settings where killing could maybe become a moral thing. If you live in a small society and this of nomads, and the survival of the group depends on the ability to move and so on, and the society kills some of the weaker who can't move on in order for the larger group to survive. I don't know, at least I will not be the one to say this is absolutely immoral, or it's, at least there are situations also where the defense of the group depends on the death of certain. It's horrible, but it can be a necessity. So moral truth moves, and what was considered good in certain situations or morally right 100 years ago are different today and will be 100 years from now on. So yeah, only, I mean, some very basic thing of, I think, this empathy and act, how you would like others to act to you, is a basic. And on the authenticity of art, I definitely think also in other art forms you'll be able to see if there's an authenticity or not. I'm just not a specialist in that. I react at a basic level to what I see, but I'm not, you can say, taught in it. I don't know if you want to add something.
I mean, that's why I was referring to truth, because you were saying that in economics, for example, or in math, truth may be different and maybe also easy to define, whereas maybe in art it's much more complicated to say what is actually true. That may be true also for the issue of authenticity. What is actually authentic is not necessarily to everybody the same. And I think this is what I personally think. It is really also a phenomenon of contemporary art in particular, because the rules are not set anymore. It's much more difficult to say what is actually authentic, what is reality. You know, we have really learned that these things have become much more complicated. Of course, I know that many artists also sometimes hide their kind of ego trips behind this pretension. I agree. But however, it has become definitely more complicated. But on the other hand, there's probably no question that, as you said also, that art generally adds something to reality. You mentioned the mirror, yeah? So the mirror being a kind of tool to, on the one hand, reflect reality, but it is not the reality. Yeah, the mirror image is not the reality itself. I think art has a kind of similar function or quality. It is not the reality, but it may mirror the reality. Literature may mirror the reality, but is not the reality. So therefore, it also may help us to simulate, to negotiate our relationship to reality. As you said earlier, for example, instead of consuming reality, we are not really able to sort of digest news, for example, from all over the place. Maybe art is also an opportunity to learn the experience by simulating cases, by negotiating a reality. So this is at least how I understood also your work. And maybe as a final question to you, I found it intriguing when you were talking about how you research and finally come up with a new product of your work, which may, to some extent, even make you occupied much longer than the production itself. So it has a longevity which goes on after you have finished your work. Because I know it from many other artists who would say, for example, in theater, there's a premiere and the work is done, I'm moving on to the next project. You as a writer said, today, the book will actually occupy me much longer. It will disturb me maybe, and I will find out many aspects of this book only later. How does it actually interfere? Because you're in the meantime in the process of another project, of another book maybe. How does it interfere? How much it will influence your further work as a writer?
I mean, it does interfere to some extent, but we are also living beings, and this thing, I think it's Kierkegaard who said this, we live life forwards but understand it backwards. I mean, we only understand whatever we go through after it has happened. And it's a bit the same here with the writing. So it lives in me. I can't, it's just that it's not closed, that it keeps living. What is more disturbing in a way is that since my book has, in a way, the same slow route in the world, I mean, now, 14 years after I wrote it, Nietzsche is spreading all over the world. Com is slowly starting to go out in the world, and I wrote it or published it in the original in 2008 in Denmark. So my books are very slow. And that, of course, means whenever I have to present a book that maybe I wrote 10 or 12 years ago, I'm taken back to that story that occupied me at that time, but I'm somewhere else. So I'm trying to do it less and less with the very old books, because they do take me back. Even I can learn new things, but I just prefer not to talk so much about it. And the other thing I think we spoke shortly before we came in here about is that feeling when you speak about a novel that has taken you 3-4 years to write, and you have 20 minutes or half an hour, even if it's a 1 hour and a half to speak about it, you always feel you reduce your own work. And somewhere that is also difficult to deal with. But yeah, I try to find a balance. I haven't been that good at it yet. But basically, when you then immerse yourself totally in a new book, I can almost forget the names of characters and what happens in my old books. And then only when I come out again can I remember. It's also like you're not the same person who wrote that book later.
Janne, thank you very much. That was very interesting and in many ways eye-opening. The work of a writer who is also an activist. And my final question is, there's probably no doubt that activism in your work benefits from your writing or from your existence as a writer. But how is it the other way around? How your writing benefits from your activism?
Oh, I wish it did. I don't know yet if it will. I think it will that I learn about subject matters that I probably wouldn't have learned about otherwise. Like, because I got preoccupied with mass surveillance after Snowden's revelations, I also had to read quite a lot about what is possible and follow it much more closely than I would have otherwise. And it's not that I want to write a novel about surveillance directly, because I think actually it's quite boring. I, in a way, I don't know why, but I just have this thing, I don't want to write about that line. But what is really interesting is, I mean, in a literary sense, psychology, what happens to us as human beings when we can never consider ourselves private, which is almost the world we live in. What does it actually do to us? And then it becomes interesting and worth writing a novel about. And I don't think I would have thought so much about it unless I had been directly involved.
Janne, thank you very much indeed. It was great to having you here. Hopefully soon again in one or the other way. Maybe there will be more activities in other departments of this university where you could be involved, like last time with theater. I wish you all the best for all your work, and toi 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 for your next book. I know that you're actually almost on a retreat already. You disclosed only today to me that when I asked you at the Frankfurt Book Fair to join us here for the lecture, that you had already decided actually to really give it a break and for longer to not appear in public and to be able to focus on literature, but you made an exception for us today. So from tomorrow onwards, you will be sort of offline for quite some time. Thank you again for being here today and online so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me here.
Allow me to remind you that this is a series of lectures, so there's more coming up. The next one will be only in next spring, at least in this form. We will have something else in December, which is not, that will be broadcasted later on the internet, but will be not public as an event. The next series of lectures starts in spring next year. I mention it now already because it will have a slightly different format because it will be part of an educational program we are running here for further education. And it will focus, among other things, on Chinese contemporary art. And the next lecture on, I think, April 1st, if I'm not mistaken, or March 31st, that will be announced yet, will be held by the director of the new Museum for Contemporary Chinese Art in Hong Kong, M+, which will, among other things, present a large collection of Chinese contemporary art of a Swiss collector, Mr. Uli Sick. That will be probably very interesting to see how our human compass can be actually translated into the contemporary art world between Switzerland and Hong Kong. Hope to see you back again. At that point of time, there will be also here available some flyers with more information about this program if you want to grab it. Thank you very much and have a good day. Have a good night.